Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi, my name is Alex Weitzman, and I'm a huge fan of language learning. I've been fortunate enough in my life to have gained proficiency in 5 different languages. However, language learning is not always easy. Sometimes it looks like this, but other times it looks like this. This is me falling asleep in my French high school class. But even though language learning can be challenging, because sometimes the material is difficult or the classroom environment is boring, I've always done my best to keep pushing on regardless of challenges because I just love learning languages. Unfortunately, it seems like many of my peers have not shared the same experience. Let me introduce you to a number, 8.1%. This was a figure found by the Modern Language Association representing the percentage of all American university students studying a foreign language in 2013. Now, I don't know about you, but this number came as a huge shock to me. 8.1% is a tiny proportion of all American university students and makes up half of the 16% that were studying foreign language in the 1960s. This figure has been at a consistent decline ever since. Now, this is perpetuated not only by the students, but by the institutions themselves. Today, around half of all American universities still require students to study a foreign language, and the other half does not. This has been found in lower and secondary education as well, where today less than half of all elementary, middle, and high schools even offer foreign language instruction. In America, there is no national requirement, legally, requiring students to study language, while in countries such as Europe, or many countries in Europe, as well as countries such as Thailand and Kazakhstan, there is a legal requirement requiring all students to study 1 or even 2 foreign languages. So why is it different in America? Why do Americans seem to belittle language learning so much? Well, one theory for this is the relative isolation of the United States and its vast size, where everyone speaks English and we don't really feel a need to be speaking foreign languages. Another theory is the Americanization of the globe, where today American culture, and thus the English language, has seemed to permeate every aspect of global business, entertainment, and general cross-border communication. But perhaps the reason why Americans have stopped studying foreign language is that they've given up on trying to learn something that simply doesn't work. Perhaps the system that has existed in the US teaching foreign language for the past 2 centuries is simply not effective enough. In my presentation, I'll be discussing the importance of the language gap in language learning, and I'll be addressing the system in the United States as it exists today and ways that it could be redesigned to most effectively challenge students to promote good language learning. In my presentation, I'll be discussing the current problem as it exists today. I'll be looking at effective models that prove great alternatives to the system of the United States. And I'll be having a discussion at the end of why study language at all and why this is relevant in American society. So to begin, the current problem. Let me present you with a scenario. You're sitting in your Spanish class, falling asleep at this point, listening to your Spanish teacher who's standing at the front of the room reading grammar rules out of a textbook and handing you a list of vocabulary you have to have memorized by Thursday, as well as expecting you to know how to conjugate all the verbs on page 431. Now, I'm sure this sounds pretty familiar to you. This is a system that's implemented in schools across the United States called bottom-up learning. This system focuses on form over meaning. It is very teacher-centric, where the teacher often stands at the front of the room and hands off knowledge to the students, expecting them to absorb it on the spot or to memorize it after the presentation. And this system does not expect students to tackle more complex material until they have first conquered and completely understood the form of the language grammatically. Now, this traditional system was the effectiveness of the system was tested by John B. Carroll in a study conducted in 1967. Carroll tested the performance of around 3,000 American university students majoring in French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish, and evaluated their performance in speaking, writing, reading, and listening compared to the number of hours they had spent studying that language. Carroll discovered a ceiling effect, where students who had studied the language for around 600 hours hardly reached intermediate high levels in that language. Carroll discovered that only students who supplemented their traditional classroom instruction with an immersion program or a study abroad program were able to overcome the ceiling effect. But people who were majoring in that language in the traditional classroom were not able to reach those higher levels. This brings us to the importance of effective programs. Many case studies have proven that there are programs out there that exist that are much more effective than the current traditional model. These include immersion programs, content-based programs, and task-based programs. Immersion programs were most well known in their implementation in the bilingual schools of Quebec, where native English speakers were immersed in French language and instructed entirely in French for the first 2 years of their education, and only subsequently reintroduced to English language arts. This was done in an experiment in kindergartens in Montreal, and this experiment gained a lot of acclaim and success because the students were found to gain really, really impressive skills in that language. Unfortunately, immersion programs are not always feasible, especially in the United States, where we only have one official language. But there are models out there that emulate the immersive experience by engaging students in very practical tasks that have them using the language for direct activities. These include content-based and task-based programs. Content-based programs revolve around the academic study of an academic subject that would normally be taught in English in the target language. For example, studying history in French or studying economics in Spanish. Task-based programs focus around completing everyday tasks such as ordering food at a restaurant or making a hotel reservation or asking for road directions. Both of these programs are driven entirely by the activities themselves, where the students are learning by doing instead of being handed off knowledge by a teacher. The thing that distinguishes these three models from the traditional classroom model is that these models challenge students and they encourage students to step out of their comfort zone in language learning and to really embrace the gaps that exist between their own language, their current knowledge of the language and the knowledge that they would like to achieve. Only with models such as these can the ceiling effect be overcome. Now you're probably asking yourselves now, why is this important? Why learn language at all, and why do we even need to change the system? Well, imagine if our world, instead of looking like this, looked more like this, where we had a global conversation with countries across the world. Here's a picture of me with my French host family from when I did a study abroad program in high school. My French host family did not speak a word of English when they welcomed me to their home. And the only thing that allowed me to create the deep bond I encountered with my new siblings and parents was my previous study of French. And if I had not reached advanced levels of French in high school, I would not have been able to have as authentic an experience as I did in France. Learning languages allows us to encounter so many corners of the world we would never have encountered otherwise. It gives us an understanding of the other and helps us learn about new cultures. Doing this might help prevent societal issues that have faced us throughout history and today. A more connected world would help prevent war, not only in America, but in countries across the globe that need humanitarian aid, and for that, empathetic understanding is required from more established countries that could provide such aid. A more global understanding of each other would also allow us to be more accepting in our own home, where all of us are unique and different, and would help us embrace those differences. I would like to end with a quote from Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela once said, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. But if you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart." Thank you for listening.
I think that one really important part of learning language is also learning about the culture that the language comes from, and besides those immersion programs, I was wondering if the task-based and the content-based, if you read of any techniques that really incorporates culture in the classroom without having to go to another country.
Yeah, so a huge thing about content-based and task-based programs is that instead of using a textbook that was written by a professor intentionally for the class, they only use authentic materials from that country. And that's part of the reason why it's such a challenge, because you face novel ideas you might not face if it was written out for you in a textbook. But it's better because not only will it help you learn that on your own through doing, but it also gives you introduces you to that culture, and it's also more exciting to be learning while reading authentic cultural material and learning about the country itself rather than just the language. Yeah.
So you talked a lot about immersion programs, and this is just like a question I had because I took French in high school and had the experience kind of really boring teacher with all the grammar rules and like sleeping through class for like 2 years straight. But
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like, I guess what level of like proficiency would you need to like have before going into a different country and like being able to absorb the language?
So the answer is like, it's a little complicated. Like, I think a lot of research that I've been reading has been like comparing like children learning language and adults learning language, because when you're a child, you only learn language like without any previous experience. Obviously, you're like completely immersed in it. And people were saying that like some people were thinking it's due to age, but other scholars were saying that maybe it's because like adults just have like for some reason mentally they're just not capable of like putting themselves in a new language because they're just like used to their current language. So it's a lot about just like expanding what you're comfortable with, and it should be completely possible to do it like starting at zero. Like there are a lot of activities that are focused around like seeing something and then pointing at it and being like, this is that. So like maybe it would be faster to start out with like maybe basic words, but like it should be possible. It's just like probably maybe like you'd have to like know a bit through translation, and then like I haven't found like a specific like point where it's most effective, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of bouncing off of that, it seems to me like even the content-based, especially and maybe the task-based, you still need to have like a foundation, well, especially the content-based. Like I don't know with my current level of Spanish if I could just learn another subject in Spanish. And so would you argue that these are actually practical for a beginning, or how would you recommend, beginning a language? Because it's kind of like a midway.
So like, so I was actually, so for task-based stuff, like I was saying before, there are a lot of activities that are just like, you look at something, like for example, spot the differences. You don't really need to know how to so you have a teacher that's always there to like shelter the information and to like help you out if you need it, but like the most learning is done on your own. And then for task-based, there's like those types of activities, and the teacher is there to like point out stuff to you. And then for the content-based programs, the teacher can shelter the material itself. So even though it's authentic material, they would have a lot of like elaboration within it. So they add like a sentence that like rephrases things so that they're easier to understand. It's like a little. It's true that it's hard to like do it from scratch, but after like the basic, like literally like a week of learning, like the normal way, you would switch to this. So, yeah. Yeah.
I did study abroad in high school. I went to like 4 Spanish-speaking countries, and I found it more helpful that like when I was forced to like, when I needed Spanish to like survive, just to communicate with my host mom, I did better than sitting in the class while I'm always sleeping or whatnot.
Right.
So, I don't know, I just, do you think it's more valuable to like actually going on like study abroad trips compared to like just being in the classroom? Because like if I can't get directions to go back home, then you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think study abroad is I think the best method. But like most people don't have access to that, or like they can't afford it, or like when you're learning in school, like you want to be able to learn a language and you can't go abroad. So the best way is to like try to like imitate that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So you've heard today